Martinez de Pasqually was an 18th-century mystic and theurgist who had a fundamental impact on modern occultism. His most important contribution was the creation of the Order of the Elus Cohens, a spiritual and initiatic society that combined esoteric Christianity, Neoplatonism, elements of Jewish Kabbalah, and ceremonial magic. Unlike many forms of Freemasonry developing in that era, the Elus Cohens practiced actual theurgy, the invocation of divine and angelic beings, not merely as symbolic rites but as living spiritual operations intended to purify the soul and restore humanity to its prelapsarian state. Pasqually taught that mankind had fallen from divine unity due to a primordial rebellion, and that the purpose of initiation was to reverse this fall, a process he called reintegration. This concept of reintegration became a key theme in later Western esotericism. His teachings posited a cosmology in which angelic beings and dark entities continually interact with the human soul, and initiates must engage in ritual combat, under divine guidance, to free themselves from these lower influences. The rituals of the Elus Cohens were intricate and highly structured, involving prayers, invocations, fasts, and symbolic acts of purification. Though the Elus Cohens did not survive long after the death of Pasqually in 1774, his doctrines continued through his students. Louis-Claude de Saint-Martin would later distill the Pasqually theurgical system into a more internalized mysticism, creating what became known as Martinism. Saint-Martin focused less on ceremonial practice and more on inner illumination, but he always considered Pasqually his spiritual master. Another student, Jean-Baptiste Willermoz, incorporated the doctrines of the Elus Cohens into the rectified Scottish Rite, an esoteric Masonic system that preserved the teachings in coded form within its rituals. These threads, Martinism, esoteric Freemasonry, and the continued study of reintegration, played an important role in the broader occult revival of the 19th century. The occult luminary Pappus revived Martinism and brought the Pasqually cosmology back into active use. While later movements such as the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Theosophical Society, and Aleister Crowley Thelema were not directly descended from the Elus Cohens, many of their core ideas, spiritual ascent, angelic hierarchies, ceremonial invocation, can be traced to Pasqually influence often through Martinist or Masonic channels. The legacy of the Elus Cohens today survives in revived Martinist orders, esoteric Freemasonry, and in the practices of occultists who emphasize theurgical work as a means of communion with the divine. The Pasqually vision of a sacred priesthood, engaged in the restoration of divine order, continues to inspire those who see spiritual work not merely as personal development, but as a cosmic responsibility. His vision speaks to a perennial aspiration within occultism to re-establish the broken link between man and the divine, and to do so through disciplined initiatic labor. The influence of Martinez de Pasqually on Paschal Beverly Randolph and the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light is substantial. It moves less through direct transmission and more through the underground currents of 18th and 19th century Western esotericism, through shared ideas, initiatic myth, and the deep structure of ritual magic aimed at reintegration, ascent, and divine contact. Randolph, a 19th century African-American occultist, spiritualist, and sex magician, built a system that drew from many streams: Rosicrucianism, mesmerism, Sufism, early theosophy, and Hermeticism. The conceptual parallel between the magical system of the HBL and the Elus Cohens is striking. Both taught that humanity had fallen from an original divine state, and that spiritual work, through ritual and personal purification, could restore the soul to divine union. Both emphasized the power of inner planes, spiritual hierarchies, and disciplined magical practice, and both placed a premium on initiatic transmission and spiritual lineage. Randolph's doctrine of the soul's descent and return echoes the Pasqually cosmology of reintegration. In the Randolph system, the human being is a divine spark trapped in matter, destined to return to its source through love, will, and gnosis. While Pasqually framed this process in Christian Kabbalistic terms, Randolph did so through the language of erotic mysticism and spiritual alchemy. But both saw the cosmos as a place of spiritual exile and magic as a sacred science to reverse that fall. There is also a deeper resonance in the way both men approached magical hierarchy. Pasqually, Elus Cohens were priests of a divine order, interacting with angelic beings through strict theurgical operations. Randolph spoke of inner masters, spiritual guides, and adepts who could influence the material world through thought and intention. In both systems, access to higher powers came not from belief alone, but from precise magical work. The Hermetic Brotherhood of Light, which emerged in the late 19th century as a fusion of various esoteric traditions, inherited both Randolph legacy and the broader tradition of occult Freemasonry in which Pasqually ideas had circulated. While the Brotherhood was influenced more directly by figures like Randolph, Blavatsky, and the Egyptian revival movements, the deeper structure of its teachings, ritual ascent, spiritual hierarchies, initiation as a vehicle for transformation, bear the unmistakable mark of the Pasqually current, if not the man himself. In this way, Pasqually influence on Randolph and the Hermetic Brotherhood of Light are primary root level. The ideas of fall and reintegration, of a sacred priesthood working with divine intelligences, and of theurgy as a means of restoring cosmic order, pass from the Elus Cohens into the magical ferment of the 19th century. They are reborn in new forms, eroticized, globalized, and adapted to new spiritual landscapes, but still carrying the same luminous seed. That hidden transmission, that lux occulta, flows from Pasqually to Randolph not through books or documented lineage, but through the shared initiatic dream of Western esotericism, the dream of returning home to the divine through sacred magic, love, and will. Michael Bertiaux' Voodoo Gnosis represents a deeply syncretic form of occultism, blending Haitian Vodou, Western esotericism, Thelema, surrealism, and initiatic mysticism. Within this complex tapestry, the influence of Martinez de Pasqually and the Elus Cohens appears not only as an ancestral current, but as an initiatic skeleton underlying much of the metaphysical framework. In the Bertiaux system, particularly as expressed through the Monastery of the Seven Rays and the Ordre Martiniste et Synarchique, Pasqually's doctrines are both preserved and radically recontextualized. The concept of reintegration, central to Pasqually teachings, finds new life in Bertiaux metaphysics. Where Pasqually framed it within a Christian Kabbalistic cosmology of divine fall and redemption, Bertiaux reinterprets it through the lens of Voodoo, where spirits and intelligences, Loa, ancestors, and cosmic egregores, become the agents of gnosis and magical transformation. Reintegration becomes not merely a return to the divine Godhead, but an ascent through zones of power and consciousness, where the magician draws on multiple lineages, including the Elus Cohen. The Elus Cohens appear in Bertiaux' work as part of what he calls the esoteric papacy, a hidden spiritual priesthood tasked with guiding initiates across multidimensional planes. Theurgical operations in Voodoo Gnosis are often couched in magical grammar that echoes the ceremonial forms of the Elus Cohens, though filtered through a more Dionysian postmodern lens. Where Pasqually worked with angelic hierarchies to purify the soul, Bertiaux initiates may summon Voodoo intelligences or traverse psychic worlds via Meon gates and etheric zones. Yet the goal remains parallel: illumination, reintegration, and the restoration of divine order within the self and cosmos. In the world of lux occulta, whether taken literally as hidden light or as a philosophical domain of esoteric truth, Bertiaux locates Pasqually as one of the great lights of occult lineage. He's not merely a historical source but a living entity, a noetic presence within the magical current. In this view, the Elus Cohens are not confined to the 18th century French mystical landscape, but are reimagined as part of a global trans-temporal initiatic priesthood that includes Voodoo magicians, Rosicrucians, and the masters of the Monastery of the Seven Rays. The Bertiaux engagement with Pasqually is never purely scholastic. It's initiatic, visionary, and magical. In his system, the Elus Cohen current becomes a kind of inner cathedral, a psychic space of initiatic ritual where theurgy, spirit work, and the mystery of divine fall converge. Unlike the more austere ascetic forms of earlier theurgy, Bertiaux' version is ecstatic, erotic, and often surreal, yet it retains a deep respect for the sacredness of the tradition he inherits. Thus, in Voodoo Gnosis, The light of the Elus Cohens is absorbed into a broader occult synthesis. The mystery of reintegration is no longer a Christian redemption narrative, but a magical act of self-deification, experienced through contact with spirits, energies, and inner powers drawn from multiple worlds. The Pasqually influence has become reintegrated as a deep structure, half buried, half revealed, within the living body of the Bertiaux esoteric vision.